But it's how to address the problem that's the sticking point for everyone involved. Brad Polumbo from Young Voices wrote about this in the National Review. He's up late with me live from the campus of UMass Amherst and a little dressed up for 11:30 on a college campus, Brad, but we'll let you have it. Let's talk about this. So I think about when I went to college, and it was a state school. I paid about $3,000 to $4,000 a year in tuition. It took me a couple of years to pay it off. Times have changed.
Yeah, I'm a jealous man. You're paying that little. No, I mean, nobody on either side of the political aisle is going to pretend that the cost of college and the amount of student debt out there isn't simply outrageous. But I think at this point, we know that Bernie Sanders is running in 2020. We know that 77% of millennials support his socialized higher education proposals. And so if you're conservative like me and don't want to see that become a reality, you have to offer your own solution. So what I'm advocating for is fiscal conservatism on campus and passing the savings on to students.
All right, so how would you do that? Because I think when you look at, there are some people that say, okay, look at what, I would assume, as a conservative but also a capitalist, you have professors out there making a good amount of money, and that's the whole gist. You get a job out of college, you go out and you make as much as you can. But the reality is that is a big problem for a lot of universities.
Yeah, but the great thing is that there's so much waste on college campus out there that it's real easy to cut down on things. Look at what Mitch Daniels did at Purdue University. He cut $8 million from the operating budget over there, and he cut back on room and board expenses, cost of textbooks for students, and he cut all of that budgetary waste from administrators, not academics. So even though he cut back on the budget and he instituted a 6-year tuition freeze, they actually went up in the rankings, not down.
Mitch Daniels, by the way, for people who don't know, is a former Republican governor of the state of Indiana. He was President George W. Bush's budget director. He was a guy that a lot of people thought was going to run for president at some point. He did not. Not yet. Well, that's true. I mean, you never know at this point. But I guess when you look at college campuses, most frequently when we talk about it, we hear from people, conservatives, who complain about what's being taught in the classroom or the culture on campus. But if you're a taxpayer, if you go to a public university like, UMass or something like that, what are some steps you can do immediately? If you as a student could go to the higher ups and say, let's do these 3 things, what would you tell them to do?
Awesome. Well, I would love to have that power. The first thing I would do is cut back on our outrageous athletic spending. We spend millions and millions of dollars to have a football team that can't win a game. But I would also, I'd also cut back on the vice provost, chancellor of this, of that. I mean, we have out of every 8 administrators, you could cut of those positions and you wouldn't notice a difference on this campus, right? They push paperweights around all day. There is so much administrative waste. You look at the rise in administrative jobs and salaries over the last 10, 20 years at colleges across the country. It's a big reason that this waste is pushing up the cost of college. And it's one that Democrats and liberals don't want to talk about because those are often their friends filling those jobs.
Well, and I'll tell you one thing that my alma mater, California University, did, and by the way, only over an enrollment of about 7,000 people, but every student would pay, every school has an activities fee, but we kind of bought into a private corporation called the Student Association, and that money went into a pool, and then students got together and decided how to divvy it up, and that ended up going to athletics and some of those larger groups as well as some of the smaller groups. So that kind of democratized the system a little bit. But Brad, before we go, you mentioned about Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. I covered Bernie Sanders rallying in Boston back in 2015 on his way to the convention. It's going to be very hard to win the hearts and minds of students because, let's be honest, I mean, free college sounds great, and they don't necessarily think about how they're going to pay for it.
Yeah, it sounds great if you don't think about the $800 billion that it would cost or the effect it would have on graduation rates or all sorts of the unintended consequences. But here's how you're going to win them over. Stop making them pay so much in tuition. When I was writing the article for National Review you mentioned, I interviewed students at Purdue, liberal, Democrat, conservative, libertarian. They all told me the same thing. They like Mitch Daniels and they like what he's done. It's not super political or super partisan to cut back on waste and pass the savings on to students. And I think we could win over all young people of all political orientations with that message.
By the way, have you figured out how much you're going to owe when you walk later next year from UMass?
Not a small amount, but not as much as some of my peers who went to $60 grand a year private schools either.
Absolutely true. All right. Hey, Brad Polumbo.